Welcome back, everybody! We are here for the second half of the second review of the second Chronicles DLC, Alexander the Great. For those who missed the first part, well, definitely watch it before the second half, but if you aren't one of those people that will jump into a show starting in Season 3, this video will conclude my breakdown of the Alexander the Great Grand Campaign for AoE2 DE Chronicles. In my first part, I introduced Alexander himself, the structure of the campaign and my review for it, and we made our way through half of the scenarios. This second part will cover the final 9 missions in the campaign, and then it'll give my broader thoughts as to what worked and what didn't in this DLC, and then give some perspective as to how the Chronicles series of expansions stands in AoE2 as a whole. Of course, if you are enjoying this series and looking forward to part 2, please be sure to leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts on the rest of this expansion, and subscribe to the channel for tons more AoE2 content. Sellout is done, and there is a lot to cover, so let's jump right back into Alexander the Great. We kick things off nice and light and easy in the 10th scenario, Tyre must fall. Alexander and his forces arrive on the Phoenician coast, outside the island city of Tyre. Our protagonist wishes to pray at the temple dedicated to Heracles, but those rude Tyrians decide to kill his ambassadors. This makes Alexander, not happy, and he vows to siege and conquer the city of Tyre. You begin in Parmenions' camp to the southeast of the map, and must first take the city of Old Tyre on the coast to establish your own camp. Once you do so, the main thrust of the mission opens up. You need to build a mole across the sea so you can march your army into the city. Yes, old school fans will remember the shoutout in Saladin 5.
My lord, this mole was made by Alexander the Great when he lay siege to Tyre in 322 BC. Let us hope we are more successful.
This mole is extremely difficult to build, however, as the Tyrians have a superior navy to anything you can build, and they will also land on your shores to harass both your base and the engineers building the mole. Niarchos will eventually arrive with the ability to research Imperial Age warships, but that's not until around an hour of game time, it seems. Still, you will eventually complete the grueling process of building your path into Tyre, and then begin the final assault. The city still has infinite unit spam coming your way, but if you can snipe the Wonder, you will win the scenario. So although this mission is quite straightforward, there are still a couple of choices to make. First, once Niarchos arrives, you will get your choice of ranged support mercenary, either the anti-infantry slingers or the generalist archers. Then, once you breach the city, bringing Alexander to the temple he wanted to visit in the first place will grant him an additional aura effect, either extra attack for your unique units or extra movement speed. Lastly, if you bribe the pirates in the previous scenario, you will also get some extra warships once Niarchos shows up. Alrighty, so what to say of Tyre must fall? Well, to its credit, this mission does give the player the true experience of a grueling, difficult, and likely pointless siege. On the other hand, this mission is quite a slog. Your enemies have both the numbers and technology advantage against you, and they will also win a war of attrition as they never run out of resources. In fact, this scenario follows the HD Forgotten school of scenario design, with the only way to stop reinforcements being to snipe production buildings, as there are no enemy villagers to replace them. Honestly, this always feels pretty lame, as the best strategy to limit the enemy warships is to just sack your own to get rid of the enemy docks. Then, once you're in the city, it's all about just keeping your trebs alive long enough to destroy the Wonder. Considering there are still tons of enemies around when that happens, it really undermines the whole complete conquest idea. Yeah, Tyre must fall is one of those missions with a cool idea, but whose execution feels rather clunky and grindy. Oh man, next up is the big one, the epic final confrontation between the Macedonians and the Persians in the 11th scenario, the Battle of Gaugamela. Alexander's and King Darius III's forces arrive on a dusty field and marshal their forces for an all-out assault. It is nighttime, so you have 10 minutes to prepare for Saracen attack. To build up your forces. You have a whopping 300 pop limit, and the entire southern portion of the map is filled with resources, so boom up like crazy as quickly as possible, because you need to be ready to spam units. Alexander commands the middle of the Macedonian line, with the sniveling Parmenion holding the left and the gallant Perdiccas holding the right. Your main goal is to defend the 3 command tents for an indeterminate amount of time, which is realistically some 40-odd in-game minutes, while the Persians send wave after wave of troops against you. Holding even your own tent is tough, but like an actual general would have to do, your main challenge here is choosing how best to divide up your forces, making sure each side has the necessary troops needed to defend its command tent. Furthermore, at your command tent, you have a slew of one-time bonuses that you can activate. These include a huge influx of a certain type of soldier, attack and armor buffs, and then specific boosts to Parmenion and Perdiccas. Eventually, the Persian tide begins to falter, and you can then charge forward to take the Persian camp and win the battle. So this mission is very straightforward, and there are only two side objectives. One where you need to secure the prisoners on the left flank, and then the one where you have to secure the supplies on the right flank. So let's just jump into the analysis of the Battle of Gaugamela. This is probably the most famous clash in the entire campaign, and just like how it was important for the first Chronicles to get the battles of Thermopylae and Marathon correct, it was equally essential to deliver a memorable experience for the big showdown between Alexander and Darius. And I will say that as someone who generally doesn't prefer this type of mission, the CA team did a pretty darn good job of making this an epic battle. The stakes and populations are huge, and although the mission is not too long, it is incredibly intense from the second the battle starts, and you are really put to it to hold for the entire duration of the Achaemenid attack. Actually, my only real gripe with the mission is that it doesn't tell you how long you need to defend, which can make it a bit frustrating. I guess it makes the scenario more realistic, but from a gameplay perspective, it would be nice to be given some greater parameters of what exactly you need to do. However, other than that, the one-time effects are certainly interesting and allow the player to have a bit of strategic choice as to how they want to defend. And these choices are super important, because if you do not use your reinforcements effectively, you will certainly lose the battle. The Battle of Gaugamela really is an epic climax in the war between Macedon and Persia, and the scenario really delivers that experience to the player. Oh boy, next up is a scenario that is, in theory, a bit of a relaxing détente after a huge battle, the city at the end of the world. A very different type of mission, Alexander arrives in the Fergana Valley and looks to build a grandiose city in the middle of nowhere. Notably, this is after having Parmenion killed, so Clytus and his other advisors are already getting kind of on Alexander's, shall we say, mental stability. Anyway, the gameplay of this level is completely different from typical AoE2, and is much more reminiscent of a city builder game. You begin with the bare bones of a city, and must, through the course of the level, build it up by establishing various districts, which give you more resources, troops, etc. For instance, you have separate districts, each for increased passive food, wood, and gold income, defense districts with towers, blacksmith districts with technologies, and so on. However, while you are building up your majestic city, the locals are rather unhappy with your presence, and attack you more or less constantly, requiring the player to effectively utilize very limited resources and troops to defend a large area. Meanwhile, you are also encouraged to strike out and raid enemy camps, steal horses, and vanquish bandits. Eventually, you will build a wonder to complete your city, winning the scenario. So there are a couple of decisions to be made in this crazy mission. First, as the new ruler of the Persian Empire, Alexander can choose between the two Achaemenid unique units, the Immortal and the Chariot, to add to his mercenary tent. Then there is your final decision with your wonder. You can choose to build one of two wonders, each giving you an economic bonus for the rest of the campaign, either faster working farmers or faster working gold miners. Lastly, there is an achievement in this mission, and that is to get every single district upgrade available. This is not fun at all to do on Legendary, and took me 2 in-game hours. I had to defeat the Sogdians to have enough breathing room to get all the upgrades. Alright, so the city at the end of the world. On the one hand, this is an incredibly creative scenario that highlights one of the most important parts of Alexander's empire, and that is how he built cities everywhere and used it to spread Hellenistic culture, and I'm really glad the campaign captured that aspect of his legacy. Gameplay-wise, the whole passive income and district building did feel like a unique break from the traditional build-up of your army and then smashing the enemy that we've had for the past several missions. On the other hand, the implementation of this scenario, on top of being buggy at times with the buildings not being built by the AI when they should, is just extremely annoying. The gameplay is such a large departure from regular AoE2 that the basic unit stats and interactions are all divergent from what they normally are. This includes both yours and the enemy units. The player is also attacked constantly from every direction, at least on legendary difficulty, and it is frankly annoying having to rush to every side of the city without being able to complete the side objectives, as the AI defenders and Perdiccas are the next best thing to useless. It's honestly very strange and immersion breaking that the local bandits and Scythian nomads have far more powerful units than the mighty Macedonian Empire. All in all, this is a really cool scenario that is unfortunately very grindy and frustrating to actually play. Our next scenario takes us all the way to South America with the Peru. Just kidding, it's India with the Puru in the Land of Five Rivers. Indeed, this is our only scenario in the campaign where we play as the third and final new civilization, and it serves as an introduction to King Porus and the setting where the final leg of the campaign takes place. Porus, having recently murdered the previous king of the Takshila, looks to solidify his gains in the region by defeating his son Ambi. On a map of the flooded Indus River region, you begin with control of a decently sized military military camp to the south center. A short way to the north lies the heavily fortified camp of Ambi. This camp is too strong to attack at first, so Porus has to build up his power on the battlefield by destroying raider camps and rebuilding nearby towns. You can also hire mercenaries to aid you, destroy the enemy docks to prevent them from making more ships, and build a couple of castles to block any reinforcements by land. Once you restore the village's markets, they will also tribute you plenty of resources over time. Eventually, you will become powerful enough to take Ambi head-on, and destroying his camp will win you the scenario. Alright, so as in the Land of Five Rivers is both our introduction to India and the only time you play as the Puru Civ, this is an important scenario. On the introduction to India side of things, I would say the mission is quite successful. India, despite being exotic and wealthy compared to bleak Macedonia or arid Persia, is nonetheless filled with the same sort of petty squabbles between rulers that exists everywhere else in the world. Porus is brash and militaristic, while Ambi is something like a whiny teenager. The banter between the two really does a nice job of establishing the situation here in the Indus floodplain. When it comes to the gameplay, like the Thracians, this is another full mirror match scenario, which is not the most exciting. It is much easier than most of the other missions in this campaign as well, and there really isn't a whole lot stopping you from building up to an enormous army. If anything, running around the map and taking out the small camps is more tedious than challenging. Then, the final fight feels like you're just slamming the exact same units into each other, but you have more of them. Again, as this is our only opportunity to play as the Puru, I will quickly give my thoughts on the civilization as a whole. In general, I do think they are more fun to play as than the Macedonians and especially Thracians, but are still fairly one-dimensional. Basically, the civilization only does its two unique units well. Yes, the bowmen and elephants are powerful units with full upgrades, and they complement each other well, but it feels like that's all there is to the Puru. I'll talk more about the whole design of the Chronicles civs at the end of the review, but for now, I will say that it is really lame that the Sanaya elephant costs 2 population space, when you really don't need that in a campaign setting. That's enough for the Puru though. Let's move on to see how Alexander deals with them. Alexander finally crosses into India in the 14th scenario, the Battle of the Hydaspes. Another big epic battle scenario, Alexander challenges King Porus of the Puru to battle along the muddy, monsoon-flooded Hydaspes River. But unfortunately for Alexander, he accidentally kills Clytus in a drunken row, so whoopsies. It's okay, Alex, it happens to the best of us. As for the battle, the two forces are arrayed on opposite sides of the mighty Hydaspes River, and you will need to transport across. The gimmick to this scenario is the landing zones, which are 6 designated areas that the player will need to control 2 of for 15 in-game minutes. The wrinkle in that objective is that Porus will send a gigantic army to take back the landing zones, as well as smaller forces to take the others. This creates a back-and-forth battle where you are trying to land all over the place, and Porus is trying to defend all of your beachheads. Furthermore, you can command Perdiccas to hold various landing sites, and he is actually useful this time. Go Perdiccas! Once you control the landing zones, you will have the opportunity to go on the offense, and defeating Porus will win you the mission. So, although this is a straightforward level overall, there are a couple of choices and an achievement to complete. First, you get another mercenary choice. This time it is between what is essentially a Genitor and a Paladin variant. Next, there is a side quest with a special mule cart that you can snag in the east of the map, which boosts the gather rate of nearby villagers by 15%. Then there is the achievement where you have to hold all 6 landing zones at once. Honestly, I think this one is bugged because I held all 6 of the landing zones in the background footage and I didn't get the achievement. You can tell that the game recognizes my control because the X's went away on the minimap. That said, Tay on my Discord server had no problem with this achievement, so maybe it's just me. So then, what to say of the Battle of the Hydaspes? Honestly, I think this level is fantastic, and the best big battle scenario in the expansion. The gimmick where you have to ferry your units across and control the landing zones is really interesting, but unlike some of the other levels, requires you to use regular AoE2 strategy and tactics to win. It's all about multitasking, using the correct units in the correct places, and Porus presents a pretty darn strong challenge. You are even under some pressure because Porus attacks your camp if you wait too long to go on the offensive. Just a really interesting level all around, and one of my favorites of the DLC for sure. Run from it, hide from it, but the 15th level, no escape, comes for you all the same. It is the 3rd scenario in a row now for a major death, this time Alexander's beloved horse Bucephalus. Now is not the time to mourn though, because the Macedonian army is laying siege to the city of Sangala, capital of the Cathaeans. After a brief scuffle, Alexander sets up 2 military camps, one to the north and one to the east, and gets 20 total villagers. These villagers are all you will get for the entire scenario, so you will have to supplement your income by plundering the escaping Cathaeans. Speaking of which, your main goal in this mission is to prevent 200 Cathayans from escaping until Porus arrives with the siege weapons necessary to take down the city. This is tough, because there are many routes in which groups of Cathayans will try and slip through, and they will send out plenty of soldiers to try and break through your defenses. Perdiccas holds the left flank with his cavalry, but unfortunately, unlike the previous scenario, is not very helpful in making sure there are no escapees. Additionally, you can increase your income by looting trade caravans that occasionally appear on the map. After 50 in-game minutes, Porus shows up with a gigantic army of reinforcements, and you can finally smash your way into the city, destroy their 3 town centers, and win the scenario. So, this is another straightforward scenario, but there is a choice to make as well as an achievement. Your choice is your Indian mercenary choice, as you can choose between the 2 Puru unique units, the Sanaya Elephant and the Padyota Archer. Both are quite good and give you something the Macedonians otherwise lack, so either choice is fine. Then the achievement. Oh boy, the achievement. The Steam achievement in this mission is to prevent fewer than 100 Cathayans from escaping, and it is hard. Personally, I would put this one up there for one of the hardest achievements in the game. It only took me a couple of tries to complete it on Legendary, as you can see in the background footage, but running your units all over the place for so long is as difficult as it is exhausting. It felt rewarding to complete though, for sure. As for No Escape as a mission, this is another very solid entry into the Alexander the Great campaign. The don't let a certain amount of units flee type of scenario is not one that has been done in AoE2 all that often, and it thematically represents attempting a siege quite well. The dialogue also demonstrates the soldiers beginning to turn on Alexander, as your conquests feel increasingly pointless. From a gameplay perspective, the mission is quite solid, although I have one major complaint, which is freaking Perdiccas. You have to rely on him to prevent escape on the left side to some degree, and the AI not sending troops to kill the escapees even when they are nearby is really annoying. Other than that, however, No Escape is another memorable and interesting mission. Next up is the foundation for all felines, the Katabasis. The title of this 16th scenario apparently translates as Mountain to Sea, referring to Alexander's march through India to get to the ocean, which is indeed what this level is all about. Arriving with his large army and setting up camp to the north of the map, Alexander looks to conquer his way down the Hydaspes and Indus rivers, but the well-defended city of Multan stands in the way. Although leveling Multan is your main goal, it is too powerful to assault at first, so you have to destroy 5 of the outlying cities, which either belong to the Malians or the Oxydracians. All 3 of your enemies are in the Imperial Age and train powerful armies and navies, so you will have to throw the full brunt of your army to storm each city. Thankfully, you are assisted on the land by Perdiccas and on the river by Niarchos. Although neither are very powerful, they do give you that extra population space you otherwise lack. Once most of the outlying villages are destroyed, the city of Multan itself, which lies on a small island to the southwest, will be open to assault, and destroying their wonder and 5 castles will win you the mission. Alrighty guys, this scenario gives us a couple of choices, including our very last mercenary selection. You can either go with sickle warriors who strip armor like an Obuk, or eastern archers which are basically Genoese crossbowmen. Then you can get an aura effect for Niarchos' flagship to either heal land units or ships. Indeed, there is a whole gimmick to this mission where you can build a special flagship which you can then set up to train villagers or some soldiers, but honestly it's more hassle than it's worth. Speaking now to the main mission of Katabasis, it really is an almost surprisingly standard build and destroy scenario. Alexander is moody that his army don't want to conquer no mo, and is resigned to conquering the less impressive cities along the river so his army can get to the sea. However, this scenario is one of the most boring and forgettable in the entire campaign in my opinion, and it really made me think about what makes a build and destroy scenario, that is, a mission where you get a big army and conquer a bunch of enemies, memorable. Think back to classic scenarios like Holy Roman Emperor, Into China, Jihad, and the Fall of Rome. These scenarios are fan favorites, and they all have something in common: variety. There is variety in the enemy civilizations, variety in the city design, variety in the enemy unit compositions, and variety in the map layout. These things really bring each faction to life, especially if there's memorable dialogue from them. Even modern scenarios like Scourge of the Levant, Wonder of the World, Rising Star, and Vitautus' Crusade, just to name a few, all do this well too, and are in my opinion all fantastic levels. Katabasis, meanwhile, has what? All of the enemies are the same civ, throw the same units at you, have very similar cities, and nothing to really differentiate them or bring them to life. Even Multan as an island doesn't really matter since you can just cross the shallows with a ton of units. I know I'm talking about this a bit more at length, but I wanted to convey why myself, and I think many of you, found Katabasis to be a forgettable scenario. Our penultimate mission is quite a unique one, with Voyage of Discovery. Thus far, every scenario has focused on Alexander himself, with the exception of the 2 levels where you play as the other civs, but this one is the only one that has Alexander, but as a supporting character. Instead, this mission has you playing as Niarchos and Perdiccas as they sail back from India towards Macedon with the intent of meeting Alexander in Babylon. Alexander, being the angsty, stubborn man that he is intent on marching through the desert with his army, so Niarchos and Perdiccas have wisely noped out of that particular adventure. To begin your voyage, you start on the coast of India with a small fleet, a moderate army, and the flagship of Niarchos. As mentioned, the gameplay of this mission is quite unique, and reminiscent of a Philadelphia custom campaign with its emphasis on exploration and unique mechanics. In this case, you need to journey your way along the coast of the Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf, while making regular stops to procure more food and water. In addition, Niarchos is looking to create his Indica, which is a collection of rare and interesting items he plans on presenting to Alexander at the end of the journey. This is where it's somewhat difficult to actually describe what you're supposed to do, other than to look around, complete any side objectives that pop up, and try to explore as best you can. This mission is really all about the experience of an adventure. You will need to collect 7 items for the Indica to win the scenario, but if you collect all 10, you will get the achievement. Eventually, you reunite with Alexander at Susa and win the scenario. Okay, so a Voyage of Discovery is easily the most creative scenario in this campaign, and probably my single favorite level. Thematically, Niarchos and Perdiccas being buddies and poking fun at each other while going on in an adventure juxtaposes with the mentally unstable Alexander's arduous march through the desert. You meet up with Alexander at several points, and Niarchos and Perdiccas are like, "Hey Alexander, we're out here having a great time finding cool stuff. How are you doing?" And then Alexander's like, "We have lost 5,000 men already. Every step increases our suffering, but I will push on and show the world how amazing I am." It's all very well done. I will say the gameplay isn't perfect, it can be a bit buggy, and like with many of the Philadelphia scenarios, the ability to speed up to ×4 and ×8 speed can be helpful. On the other hand, the mission is just fun, and one that really leans into the narrative and the experience that are the strengths of the Chronicles-style campaign. If there is any one scenario I'd recommend in this DLC, it would definitely be A Voyage of Discovery. At last, we reach the grand finale of the Alexander the Great campaign, our 18th scenario, Wrath. Unfortunately, as they are making their way back to Mesopotamia, Hephaestion, Alexander's closest friend, confidant, and probably lover, dies. Now, if before this Alex was mentally unstable, this really sets him off the deep end. Filled with, well, wrath, Alexander commands his army to utterly annihilate the Kasaans, a nearby confederation that inhabits the area around the Zagros Mountains. You begin with your army arriving from the east of the map, and quickly dispatch a nearby town to take it over as your base of operations. Note, don't kill the priests. There is nothing that would indicate this to you, but they join your side once all of the other units are defeated, and they are ridiculously OP. 75 health per second healing aura. It's just wild. Regardless, you then must go about your fell task, to kill 1,750 Kasaans, and to defeat 3 of the 4 flavors of Kasaan factions, those from the desert, hills, plains, and mountains. The kill counter is a non-issue, you'll basically reach that no problem once you get through 3 of your enemies. But that does bring you to the real problem. You have 4 post-Imperial Age enemies attacking you very often. You do have Perdiccas to help you out, which is something, although he is rather less useful than the market you can trade with at the far south of the map. Regardless, once you defeat 3 of the enemy factions, or all 4 if you want the achievement, then your real task begins, building and defending a wonder in the center of the map. Raising such a monument on their land makes the Kasaans very angry, and they will attempt to destroy the wonder until 30 minutes have elapsed. But Ornlu, if we have defeated the Kasaans already, where do they get their soldiers? Well, strawman viewer, the Kasaans used their time-honored military tactic of infinitely spawning units from several points all over the map, and flinging them at you in a constant torrent of human flesh. It's not easy, but once you've defended for 30 minutes, you will have won the scenario and the Alexander the Great campaign. Oh yeah, and the TLDW on the outro, Alexander dies shortly afterwards, his empire falls apart immediately, leaving behind a larger-than-life legacy, and setting up a potential for the next grand campaign being about Rome. Anyway, our finale, Wrath. Well, I would call it a tale of 2 scenarios. It's certainly a grandiose ending to the campaign, but even the setup of this mission leaves me with a rather pertinent question. Who who the heck are the Kasaans? They were not mentioned at any point before this, and are described as hill tribes, which somehow have a gigantic army that represents a true final test against the forces that marched their way through Greece, the Levant, Persia, and India. It just doesn't really make much sense thematically. From a gameplay perspective, the first section where you have to accumulate kills and defeat the Kasaan factions works just fine. The different groups train different armies, so there is at least some flavor there, and the challenge is nice. The groaning comes from the final segment. Defeating the Kasaans is already a huge task worthy of a scenario, but the whole added defense of the Wonder, it feels so strange with us having already defeated our enemies, and if infinite unit spam from production buildings is a sticking point to me in scenario design, infinitely spawning units from the side of the map is even worse. Your forces can easily end up with over 7,000 kills by the end of the mission, somehow making gigantic siege onager hits unimpressive. A rather tedious ending to the campaign, it must be said. Okay, phew, we have gotten through all of the scenarios of the Alexander the Great campaign. Now we can take a step back and analyze the campaign more broadly, consider its strengths and weaknesses, and look ahead to see where we go from here. So to start this, let's just power through the different unique aspects of our second grand campaign and see how they were changed or improved from Capture Age's first entry. Starting with the continuous story. Even more so than the first Chronicles, Alexander the Great was one continuous narrative from start to finish. Every scenario had something to do with Alexander himself, and we follow the same supporting cast throughout. Personally, I think the narrative worked just fine, and nothing felt drawn out or there were wasted scenarios or anything like that. Even most of the missions had unique gimmicks to prevent them from feeling too samey. If anything, the biggest downside was the gameplay. No matter how many unique mechanics you throw in a mission, the fact remains that you are playing as the Macedonians over and over and over again, which did kind of get old after a while. Like many of you, I feel like adding in a few more scenarios playing as the other civs would have been quite welcome. Next, aura effects. Interestingly, Alexander the Great really downplayed the whole aura effects from the first Chronicles. If you remember, back then, your heroes could be upgraded to have powerful bonuses throughout the campaign. By and large, these were increasingly strong effects for your infantry, cavalry, or archers. In my experience, those effects made your units way too overpowered and different from regular gameplay, so I appreciate the second edition of Chronicles having Alexander only buff the phalangites and companion cavalry, and even then with smaller effects. It keeps the gameplay more grounded, if you will. The civilizations themselves also had fewer aura-related bonuses, which I also appreciate. Now, the UI design. In my review of the first Chronicles, I talked at length about the departure from the traditional campaign menu UI to one that shows progression on a map, as well as a blurb for each scenario and a depiction of the in-game minimap. This design was clearly inspired by AOM, and although I cannot make any objective arguments against it, I was still not a fan of showing the player the entire map layout beforehand. That's what scouting is for. Relatedly, I think it was interesting that they got rid of the Scouts Report tab, which did give you an overview of the other players on the map. This has its upsides and downsides, with the positives being that you can create more surprises for the player to discover, and the downsides being that you need to do more to give each enemy faction flavor. Those were what I would consider unique aspects from the first Chronicles, but for this review, I do want to add one extra step, so to say, and that is a quick discussion of the new civilizations. In my opinion, this was a big step down from the first Chronicles. Macedonians, who you are playing as most of the time, are a fairly bland civilization with no active military bonus that encourages you to use your regular units in unique ways. The units taking less bonus damage from high ground is super forgettable, and your siege units dealing more damage to buildings is strong, but does not really change any interactions. The fortified outposts were a neat idea, although after a ton of scenarios, it did become tedious having to spam them all over the place. Then you have the Thracians, which just felt horribly underpowered in their one scenario, and the Peru also only did their unique units well. As a way to mix things up, I think it would have been neat to showcase the mercenary units more, where in some scenarios you could get access to some of the units as your only choices, and others where you get a different selection of units. It would be a way to artificially shake up the Macedonian tech tree. I'll discuss the Civ implementation in Chronicles in a little bit, but here I really wanted to underscore that, at least for me, Achaemenids, Athenians, and Spartans were all more powerful and fun to play. Okay, so with these Chronicles-specific design choices covered, let's move on to the positives and negatives with the Grand Campaign 2. In general, my thoughts are quite similar to the first version. Starting with the positives, just like the first one, the narrative is by far the biggest selling point of the DLC. The progression feels natural with Alexander's rise and fall, well, and all of the characters are well fleshed out. In particular, I feel like this DLC especially, the sound design was just fantastic. The voice actors absolutely killed it, like they were Alexander with a bunch of Theban rebels, with Alexander's voice actor in particular doing a fantastic job showcasing a complex range of emotions for our protagonist. Similarly, the dialogue and character design was fantastic with creating memorable figures, with hapless Arapos always making me chuckle, and the banter between Niarchos and Perdiccas being some of the most enjoyable of any expansion. Alexander himself was a bit annoying with pompous superiority, but that's who he was. Very much someone who started out as sympathetic and turned into someone very unsympathetic by the end. Overall, it was very well done, and I also need to give a shout out to the soundtrack, which was very grandiose and memorable in its own way. Going now to the aspects of the campaign that I thought were a mixed bag, most of which are going to broadly fall under the category of gameplay. Starting with the legendary difficulty, which was not present in the first Chronicles, the devs really did step up in creating a challenging experience, which I greatly appreciate, especially after the laughable legendary difficulty of the Three Kingdoms. However, there are different ways to implement a challenge, and creating grindy scenarios where you have to do the same thing over and over again against infinite unit spam is not fun. Examples of what I would consider a good challenge would be Right to Rule, Woe unto Thebes, Unto the Breach, and the Battle of the Hydaspes, whereas scenarios that felt more like a chore than a challenge to complete were ones like Get Rich Quick, Tyre Must Fall, The City at the Edge of the World, and Wrath. I will say that the scenario design itself was generally interesting, but again, like the first Chronicles, a bit too focused on set pieces and big one-on-one battles instead of more multifaceted ways of completing a scenario. By this, I mean that there is usually one main opponent with a huge army or city, and you need to use your own huge army in a specific way to beat the main enemy. Having that in some of the scenarios is fine, but it felt like unless I was making choices presented to me by the devs, there was little room for more organic AoE2 strategy making. Lastly, I cannot really discuss the negatives of the DLC without giving my broader thoughts, because the two are closely intertwined. This is, of course, just my opinion, but in my mind, the whole Chronicles-style DLC just doesn't feel very connected to AoE2. Like, I will play the grand campaign and reasonably enjoy it, but then I have no desire to ever touch that content again. Basically, this is fine, but I'd rather just have regular AoE2. I know many of you watching my videos really enjoy the Chronicles content, and that's great, but I just don't understand why it has to exist in the first place instead of something else. Again, there are aspects of this DLC that I really do enjoy. Some of the missions are fun and creative, and the writing and character design is great. But none of this necessarily has to do with the Ancient Era or needing an alternate game mode. For instance, why could we not just have a grand campaign on the Crusades, or the Reconquista, or the Mongol Conquest, using more familiar units, factions, and settings as the rest of AoE2? I don't understand the need to reinvent the wheel by reskinning everything and creating a completely parallel design to regular AoE2. There is even a strong argument that you can achieve far greater civilization and unit diversity by utilizing the version of the game with 50 civs in it instead of 6. You're also allowing the player to utilize more familiar bonuses and units. Why is it that in looking for a campaign, I have to switch over to a completely different game mode, but when I look at the tech tree, the Chronicles stuff is all intertwined there? Relatedly, this half integration in my mind feels like a misstep from World's Edge, Capture Age, or both, where somebody somewhere seems to want to create a balanced, distinct set of civilizations for online play. This makes no sense to me. The Chronicles civs are far too different to ever be integrated into regular AoE2 play, so they would need their own ladder. But then, who would play on that ladder? Casuals won't play it because the civs are too different from the ones they're familiar with, and the high-level players won't play it because it has no relevance to tournaments. It's not like any of the ladders created parallel to the regular one have ever been populated outside of the Empire Wars ladder, and even then only during the Red Bull tournaments. Like, who is the target audience with trying to make the civs balanced and fair? If you create a campaign-only experience, just lean into that, take those bigger design risks, and just keep it separate from multiplayer. Why on earth do Thracians need to miss important blacksmith upgrades, or Puru needing an elephant that takes up 2 pop space, or having phalangites be awful in the Castle Age? If they're gonna go down the path of making a distinct single-player-only ancient world, just keep it separate. And this really is my fundamental confusion with Chronicles. Yes, there is clearly a lot of care and budget put into things like all of the reskins, all of the dialogue, the new voice lines, and I love that, and I think many of you guys do too. But why is World's Edge putting all of that money into a niche single-player DLC instead of the main expansions? Don't get me wrong, I am no fan of the Three Kingdoms DLC. but I don't get why World's Edge wouldn't think that adding in a new architecture set for the Three Kingdoms civs, unique voice lines for the Khitans and Jurchens, or even campaigns for those civs would be worthwhile, but it is worthwhile to have that for Chronicles, which is always going to reach a far smaller portion of the player base. I don't know, guys, maybe there's something I'm missing here. So that is the great review of the Alexander the Great DLC. The Chronicles style of content is always a bit odd for me to look at because it just feels so different compared to regular gameplay. I hope I don't sound too harsh with my criticism. I appreciate that there was a lot of time and care put into this expansion, and that some of you really did like it, and maybe it's just not my cup of tea. I just don't see how the DLC is the cup of tea for enough people to justify its creation over other potential AoE2 content. There is a lot to like in the Grand Campaign narrative, and I just wish they would take that great writing and design and put it into a regular AoE2 single-player experience. But of course, let me know in the comments as to what you think of the DLC, and how terribly wrong I am on all of my analysis. Before I go, I do need to thank my Patreon supporters whose contributions really help me make these time-intensive videos, with Dan and Jared in the Great Wolf tier, and Liquid Egg Product, Carolyn, Tandoori Knight, Hryru, and Dieter in the Dire Wolf tier. But as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.